Welcome, welcome to the Unfazed, Unedited podcast, where we provide commentary on complicated topics in an uncomplicated format. I'm Dr. Shaunna Payne Gold, and I go by she, her, hers pronouns. And I'm here with Dr. Lisa. Dr. Lisa, it looks like you're on location, but
Yep.
kind of when are we not on location these days? I mean, it's just become the norm, right?
Yes, I am in a hotel room currently in Dallas, Texas. And I thought I was organized, but have learned that I did not bring all the things that I needed. So I am without headphones and without microphone. So I will just apologize right now if the audio from this podcast, for those who are listening, is not very good. It is completely my fault, but I did turn the air conditioning off in the hotel room, which is quite the sacrifice in Dallas, Texas
Yes.
to do that
Oh,
so that there
for
would
sure.
to reduce the ambient noise. So I'm hoping that
For
helps.
sure. Look, this is the unedited part, Lisa.
Right,
Okay, this is the
right.
part where it's like we chose this format to make sure people knew that the content was most important. Now,
Yeah,
all the bells and whistles may come later when, we strike it rich and all that. But
yeah,
until then, bomb content, bomb
yeah,
content. So,
yeah.
anyway, well, I'm glad that we can connect regardless of where we all are. I will be following you next week
Okay.
in Dallas, Texas. I feel like I've just gotten a lay of the land now. I mean, like I know where my favorite spots are. There's an
Hmm.
Indian restaurant I love that's down the way, all of that. So just, yeah, I've gotten used to it. But so Lisa, since we're already talking about our work, let's talk about other people's work. I think we have a word of the week for this week. So tell us
Yeah.
all about it.
Yeah. So the word or phrase, I guess, is coffee badging, which is not something I knew. And so you had sent me a piece about this, and we're going to talk about this here in a second in more detail. But coffee badging, I was like, what is that? And had to look it up. And so it's this newer concept. I think it's always existed, but it has gained momentum and steam post pandemic as businesses have tried to get their employees to come back into the office more regularly. So it essentially is I don't really want to be in the office, but my company is requiring it. So I'm going to roll in the morning I'm going to badge in, right? So that I'm logged in as being there. And then I'm going to go grab a coffee. I'm going to chat with friends in the kitchen. Maybe I'll do a little bit at my desk and then I'm going to badge out, right? And so part of this was, I think, the piece you had sent me was showing that people's work hours had shifted from kind of that 9 to 5, 8 to 5 to 10 to 4. Like there's been a shift post pandemic in the time that people are in the office. So that's a subtle difference, right? It's like shaving off a couple of hours on one end and an hour on the other end. But part of that is this rise of I want to make an appearance because you're requiring me to, but I do not want to be in the office. So I'm going to then go to a coffee shop, library, go back home and do my work from there. So that is coffee badging, which, as someone who works for myself and works from home, I don't have to do, thankfully, but
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
it's
Yeah.
definitely an interesting loophole. Maybe that's the best
Mm-hmm.
way to say it. Loophole in
Mm-hmm.
trying to circumvent some of these more kind of draconian in-office requirements that companies are instituting.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, I think I really like the phrase, the way it rolls off the tongue, because it really does tell us like what's important to us in US culture specifically. It's, mornings and coffee is almost like a foregone conclusion. Like, you would rarely talk to someone who didn't get coffee, tea, their favorite drink, something first thing in the morning type piece of things. And then also that the badging in and out
Mm,
of a job kind of reeks of the surveillance of
yeah,
it.
yeah,
So anyway, I appreciate how the word itself rolls off the tongue. People get creative around here in regards to language,
yeah,
because Dr. Lisa and I, before we hit the record button, we're just talking about this common colloquial language around showing face, right? I'm going to go to work. I'm going to show my face. So people assume that I'm here and they should assume that I'm working. And then I'm going to dip out the same way Shaunna would do that at a family cookout, the same way that Lisa may do it at the gym, wherever. I'm just making assumptions, but the applicability of showing face could be anywhere. But this one has a little deeper roots in the workplace that are really interesting to me. So let's go right into the phase in particular with phase one. I'm interested in just thinking through this with you, Lisa, around that surveillance piece that we're mentioning. Because when I think of this language of coffee badging, and PriceWaterhouseCoopers is where I saw the post that came up that said that they're shifting their office requirements post pandemic from the requirement of 2 to 3 days to now 3 days fully. So 60% of their work or their client facing work, at least 60% or 3 days. And so for me, this gets interesting, right? Because as I'm thinking about the language and the way it's being applied in real time, to me, it reeks of yes, surveillance and yes, distrust, right? And so when I read the term the first time, I'm thinking, ooh, this is interesting because if I put on my HR hat or my HR perspective or my supervisor hat that is not well versed in uh, supervising or managing hybrid or virtual employees, this is, Lisa, I don't trust you to come into work and do what you need to do. I don't trust you to come, nor do I trust you to do the work no matter where you are. And so I'm requiring you to come in for this particular amount of time so that I don't have to be flexible. This is the easiest, seemingly fair way to determine whether people are doing the work or not. Now, let's flip the script a little bit. When I read coffee badging, Lisa, did you read it as something that could possibly come from a trust perspective? Meaning, during the pandemic, obviously we all got comfortable, even the hardest of workers, the most productive of workers got comfortable being at home. And I was extremely productive and I knocked it out of the park. But now, in order to be fair, you're requiring me to come into work. I actually get more work done at home or wherever else. So I'm going to coffee badge in, show my face, hi, how you doing, leave, and still get my work done. So it's not a matter of productivity. It's a matter of I'm having to bend or acquiesce to your distrust of me, despite me being a high performer.
Right.
Did you read it one way or the other in regards to value?
I didn't read trust into it, no. I read that it was a form of resistance against overly restrictive workplace policies, which I guess if I were to have kind of thought about that further, if we peel back the onion, I would have probably gotten to trust because I do find this insistence on being at a desk in an office as the definition of workplace productivity, and this belief that if you're not in that environment you're therefore unproductive. I mean, there's so much data now to counter that. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it just flies in the face of what is real. And so this narrative that continues that we have to be in the office because that's where productivity is, given that we have so much conflicting data, where else can we land other than it's a representation of kind of a real concrete manifestation of employer employee distrust? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, and okay, so let's build on that. So we got a few things that we're thinking about. Of course, there's always, one or two bad apples, which then erodes the trust of the organization for all employees. So we got that's sitting out there, the bad apples piece. But then the next piece that you're bringing up is that distrust piece. And now let's go to the next piece I want to add on to it is employers' lack of professional development, training, or other support for people to be good supervisors no matter where you are. Because based on a lot of the consulting work that I've done with organizations that are constantly trying to, improve of course, their DEI work and training and PD, oftentimes we as Gold Enterprises propose to people, hey, you really need to do a good job of manager, supervisor training and development around DEI, specifically supervising different people as you continue to diversify your workforce, and how to be a good supervisor no matter where people are. And the majority of the clients that we work with, they go back to, oh God, we didn't think about training supervisors at all, much less training them with a DEI lens. And so now you've got a bunch of Shaunnas that are really good at basket weaving, and they get promoted to supervising other basket weavers when they don't have the skill to be a supervisor. They just have good skills as being a basket weaver, right? And so that's why I'm like, here we go again with another Band-Aid over bad systems that don't equip people to do what they need to do. Because let's be very clear, Lisa, let's pull the data on this as well. Organizations have people that are productive no matter where they are, and folks that are unproductive no matter where they are. I mean, you can share a wall with the person and they are just dragging ass, not doing what they need to do, not competent in certain areas, fooling around, whatever they're doing. And so location is interesting because it really is not necessarily directly correlated to productivity and high performance when you're requiring them in the office versus allowing them to choose. And then let's add a fourth or fifth layer on this, Lisa. Of course, the inequities, macroaggressions in the workplace. And then let's add folks that are neurodivergent. Me coming in the office and working in the daggone bullpen with 100 cubicles, and I may be neurodivergent and distractions are all around me, is problematic versus being in my office, in my space, where it's quiet. I can change the lighting. I can set up the way I want to, and I can be 4 times productive. No, you want it to be comfortable for your ill-equipped managers and supervisors, not for the employees. There's a lot of layers to this coffee badging
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah. And the thing that really bothers me about the Price Waterhouse stuff is the tracking through of people's location data, right? That just feels like such a violation. And because we've talked about work from home before and all those layers you just identified, we've had that conversation. And, we brought up Dell, I think, a few months ago, had created that system where you still get to be remote, but if you choose to be remote, then you're not eligible for promotion, right? And so we had dissected that as highly problematic. But I think it ended up backfiring on them, because I think I read somewhere that tons and tons of people were like, all right, then I won't be eligible for promotion. So I'm going to take the remote over the eligibility for promotion. So they were thinking this would be the carrot that would get people back in the office, but it ultimately wasn't. So I'm not sure how things are there. But I'm just halfway through this podcast by The Atlantic that's talking about, it's titled "Who is Remote Work Good For?" And so they're actually problematizing the belief that remote work is universally a good thing, and that in some cases employees should be in the office, right? So I haven't gotten to the end of it, so I don't want to comment on it yet because I want to listen to the whole thing. But it was a really interesting, so it's not coming at the being in the office is needed for productivity and oversight. It's not that. That's not the argument, right? It's a bit more nuanced than that. So I'm curious, but because they do talk about microaggressions, they do talk about the fact that for some people, to your point, like distractions are really a problem in the office and they need to be in that quieter space. But this tracking piece that I started out talking about with the location data, I'm like, how is this not Big Brother, right? Like, how is this not an absolute violation of my privacy, right?
Yeah, that's problematic. And again, it's a violation of privacy. And again, it's continuing to blur the lines between productive work and your perception of productive work, right? So like, Lisa, there's been times where quite literally I've been, sitting in a hospital waiting room doing virtual work online. No, it's nothing that I'm necessarily ashamed of, but also you don't necessarily need to know it either. So would you want to track the location of my computer or whatever I'm using based on, that just seems odd to me. Or, again, I think what has certainly occurred is, yes, that all those pieces we mentioned before, but the snapback has snapped the wrong people. Let's put it that way, where, trying to snap back into normal, which I mean, even when we were like a year into the pandemic, I was like, we'll never be quote unquote normal again. What's the new normal? And what's a different and possibly more accurate way of measuring productivity? I'm sorry, but if Shaunna is in the space center floating in the sky, still doing her work, what does it matter? Right. But for some people, it does matter because, again, they haven't found any other way of supervising
Right.
people's
Right.
productivity. So if I only know that if I lay eyes on Lisa, that she's being productive, then that it very much reminds me of teaching, Lisa, is that if the only way I know how to teach is lecture, then I'm predicating your productivity as a student based on how much you get from this damn lecture. Same thing with supervising. If the only way I know how to supervise is seeing you physically in a space, then that's my only way of measuring your productivity, which may not actually be accurate. Problem. We
Right.
need more versatility with our managers
Yeah.
and supervisors, which is a whole nother HR level issue, in my opinion. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Agreed.
anyway, we're very fortunate, Lisa, that we don't have to think about this.
Yes.
Yay.
Yes.
But my heart goes to all these people who do.
Yeah.
Goodness.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, enough about coffee badging. And in fact, I just want to get up from the computer right now, like go make another cup of coffee now that we've talked about it so much, right? But let's get into phase two. And phase two hits a bit closer to home for me. In fact, Lisa, right now I'm working on a proposal with another potential collaborator to work with an organization that specifically speaks to Black motherhood and the disparities around health equity in this way. When I ran across this new study, it was reported by the New York Times, and the sample happened to be 68 hospitals in New Jersey. Looking across 1 million births, Black mothers were 20% more likely to have a C-section than white women with similar health background needs. And now, Lisa, I knew this really had stirred up a lot of folks because I was doing a little bit of research to respond in this proposal. And then I get in the car randomly and I'm driving the boys to school in the morning, and the report is put on the radio again, the very same report. So I'm like, oh, this is hitting home with a lot of communities, right? And so this disparity here, 20% more likely to have a C-section. The same doctors in the same hospitals would be more likely to promote a C-section for a Black woman. Now, what I think about this is interesting too, is again, so many folks set so many high standards for places that are in the caretaking businesses, hospitals and the like, because they're assuming they're always coming from a place of care when a hospital is a business. Okay. So when it comes to being a business, then you have to think about operating rooms, which is where you actually do get a lot of revenue, right? From insurance companies or otherwise. And so when you have an empty operating room and you have a mother or a birthing parent that is about to give birth, one of those options, whether vaginal, VBAC, what have you, is more profit bearing, which happens to be the C-section. Guess where I'm going to send you to as the hospital administrator who looks at numbers all day rather than human beings and their babies. So, given this, I'm like, my friend says all the time, girl, follow the money. Well, here we are following the money in regards to where it goes. I personally had both of my sons by C-section. And so, of course, I'm personally interested in this. But Lisa, I would love to hear from your brain in regards to how does this land for you, given that I know you're probably not surprised, but what are some nuances that I'm missing because I'm so close to the topic? I mean, wasn't surprised, but once again, we have hard and fast data to tell us what we already knew. Now, what are we going to do with this information?
Yeah, what I really love about this study is your last point there about following the money. Because there's a lot of data that shows that the maternal mortality rate in the United States is abysmal, right? It's absolutely terrifyingly bad as compared to other kind of similarly situated countries, right? And so those numbers are sky high for Black and African American women, right? That is a known, that's known. We hear about it more in the political arena too, like there's more being said about how to address that now. I mean, even President Joe Biden has talked about this, right? Like, I could understand Vice President Kamala Harris talking about it because of the overlay of identities there for her. Like, that doesn't surprise me that she would be educated around that. But to have like an older white guy talk about it, that's new, right? So it is emerging, at least center left kind of political commentators. But what this study does is it says, okay, we know we have this issue. But there's this other huge element that's at play, and that is the financial piece that you just outlined. What I think is interesting and what I think is happening, and the New York Times piece especially did talk to this, is that you have medical practitioners who are already on alert to that abysmal maternal mortality rate, right, amongst, in particular, Black women. So they are overcorrecting, right? So there's this financial piece, and then there's this, I am so on alert around this high risk of birth, so I am just going to schedule the C-section. But what's the word I'm looking like it's the problem there is that C-sections can actually be more dangerous, right? So even outside of the fact that you might get a $17,000 reimbursement for a C-section versus $10,000 for a vaginal birth, for example, is that the cost for the woman who has the C-section is both more because you're in hospital longer, the recovery is longer, you're out of work longer, right? But then the risk there in terms of the suture and the stitches breaking, right, or getting an infection, like that's fairly high, right? So you've kind of replaced a risk in one area with a risk in another, and what appears to be driving that is an overreaction around maternal mortality, but this fundamental financial piece, right, which just makes it even grosser, I think. And what was really interesting to me, Shaunna, was the piece around when those operating rooms are sitting empty, the discrepancy
Yes.
between Black and white women jumps to 50%, right? So I think it was
Yes.
something like
Yes. Yes.
when the operating room is empty, it's something like 4.5% of white women will get the C-section, and something like
Mm-hmm.
8.2% of Black women would get the C-section. So that 20% that you
Mm-hmm.
originally cited more than doubles. And
Mm-hmm.
the authors were arguing that if it were universally better, right, you wouldn't see that discrepancy in rates
That's
when
right.
the
That's right.
operating room was empty or full, right? It would be a
Mm-hmm.
constant thing. And so that is what makes it
Mm-hmm.
feel pretty awful, that and
Yeah.
that this kind of, I don't know, some doctors are legitimately concerned, others maybe less so, right, around
Yeah.
the risk
Yeah.
of giving birth, and they're
Yeah.
using that as a reason to then get a higher reimbursement rate, which just
Mm-hmm.
feels, I mean, a million, 68 hospitals, a million cases, like that's not a small sample, right?
Not at all. Not at all.
Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, and like I said, my reasons for both boys, for my oldest son, he was almost 2 weeks late. And so, just there was no labor start, there was no labor progression. And so they're like, okay, let's get him out of there. Okay, fine. Then with Kendrick, which was also surprising because you're thinking, okay, if your first baby was late, then at the very least, your next baby would hopefully be on time, but certainly not early, right? Kendrick was 6 weeks early. And so at that point, it's kind of like a fish swimming around in less water, right? So he did not have as much amniotic fluid. And so they're like, okay, I go in, my water broke. I go in that morning, and the nurse just nonchalantly comes back in after putting some monitors on me. Oh, I guess we're having a baby today. I'm like, excuse me, I just had a swim this morning and I need to go to work. No, you're having a baby today. And so with that, once it was explained to me, then I understood that yes, he didn't have enough amniotic fluid to breathe internally, and so okay, we got to get him out of there. Fortunately, I did not have a lot of complications, but at the same time, again, thinking about the levels of money that were in that room in the moment, right? So the levels of money in regard to the amount of anesthesia, right? I jokingly say every time after that epidural, I could have completely run through several walls. Okay. I mean, your body is on fire for like 2 seconds and then you don't feel a thing, right? So, with that, that costs money because the anesthesiologist is actually probably the person that walks away with the biggest check in regards to this. Part of it is a requirement because their insurance has to be so much more than the average doctor's is, right? So that one piece. The other piece of you're going to have different monitors for the child if they're birthed by C-section versus not. The type of IV that you have, like there's so many different layers. Even with the recovery, like I left the hospital in 2 days after both of my C-sections. I had Trey on a Wednesday and left on a Friday. Why? Because they had plenty of operating rooms, but they didn't have enough beds. Right. So, all these things I'm looking around, I'm like, money, money, money everywhere. All right. So fast forward, Lisa, and this is what's going to probably make all of your hair stand on the top of your head. Like, what the hell? Right. Trey was born on a Wednesday. We walked in the house on Friday. Trey's dad walks out to go check the mail. The invoice.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, excuse me. No. Let me go back. 2 invoices because you leave the hospital as 2 patients.
Of
So,
course.
of course, right? So I have my own invoice, and Mr. Trey has his own invoice as well, right?
Wow.
And of course, when you ask for detailed billing, excuse me, but diapers for less than 48 hours should not cost $300.
Wow.
So that's one piece. Now let me transition over to Mr. Kendrick. Mr. Kendrick's birth, which was earlier, definitely more complications. Children's National Hospital in DC did a phenomenal job on taking care of my guy. So I'm really grateful for that. Here's the other piece, though. To get from his birth hospital in Annapolis to DC, that happened to be the first weekend in May, which anybody that lives here in the DC area knows that that's graduation weekend for most schools. So Howard University was graduating that weekend. American University was graduating that weekend. So if you were driving into the city, probably impossible to get anywhere. Mr. Kendrick was airlifted at 36 hours old, and we get the invoice back from that. Lisa, you got $16,000 sitting around anywhere that I can use? Anywhere? Thank goodness I was working for the University of Maryland and insurance was phenomenal. But still, by the time insurance kicked in and so forth, you still had about a $3,000 bill left to give birth to each child. So given that, again, I realized that Kendrick had a few more complications, but the C-section itself had a big dollar sign on it to begin with.
Yeah.
So I'll stop there with my experience, but just know that it's not, bringing a beautiful baby into the world should be a beautiful thing. Well, is it that beautiful if you're walking back in the house and you're looking at 3, 4, 5-figure invoices?
Yeah. Yeah, I have to question on with Trey. I mean, I know white women who have been late and they haven't been recommended a C-section. They've just induced labor and it's been quote unquote natural, right?
No induction for either one.
So
I'm with you. Yeah.
so I question whether Trey's birth needed to be a C-section, right? And I wonder how you feel about that given what you know and what you read in that study. Like, do you think looking back, reflecting that Trey needed to be a C-section?
I don't think Trey needed to be a C-section necessarily, but I was so exhausted by that point. I was like, I don't give a shit how you get him out, just get him out. So, of course you're just not, but that brings in what we've talked about on this podcast before around having a great support system that can think logically on your behalf while you're just really exhausted and, all the things. So in hindsight, I'm like, I don't give a shit how you get him out. I just need him out. But as far as Kendrick is concerned, I do think that did need to be a C-section because of the other circumstances. But for Trey, not necessarily. Not necessarily.
Yeah, so it does give me pause there, whether that was something. And I mean, I know you were exhausted.
I agree.
Did you feel like they explained the risks to you? Did you feel like you were given an option? Like, do you remember?
Oh, I was definitely not given an option.
Okay.
I was given lots of paperwork to sign beforehand. And in fact, in prep, because those last few weeks of a birth leading up to 40 weeks, let's say you actually do give birth within the 40 weeks, leading up to that, you're starting to go in for checkups every week. And so the weeks preceding, they do give you some paperwork to say, hey, this gives you enough time to review the paperwork, make your decisions. You know, you have to sign paperwork in regards to if we have to make a decision between lives.
Yeah.
Those types of things, they do give you time to think about that. But as far as the options of, is there any other option before we go to C-section?
Right.
That was not a conversation.
Yeah.
That was not a conversation. Kendrick,
Yeah.
I can understand that. Trey, not necessarily.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think there's that's the thing, like for people, I think if you're skeptical, right, and you're like,
Mm-hmm.
well, I don't think there's any racial biases happening here. I would encourage you to read at least a news article about the study, or if not that, the
Yeah.
study itself, because there's definitely
Yeah.
something happening here, and it's a
Yeah.
interplay of racial bias, fear around maternal mortality numbers, and money, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it's
Oh, for
not
sure.
straightforward, but there's definitely something untoward happening. And,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and I feel like, yeah, certainly I would be skeptical about your
Mm-hmm.
experience.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. And the piece, the last piece I would say, especially in regard to Kendrick's birth, is that with him, again, interesting, right? With Trey's birth, I have to admit, I was very overweight even before I got pregnant. So I know I had some other health
Hmm.
issues going on there. But when I had Kendrick, I had lost, gosh, probably 80 pounds before I got pregnant with him. I was still working out every day. I ran until I was about 7 months. And when my doctor said, just keep running until you're uncomfortable after that swim, I was swimming every day. And again, the system would say, yeah, Shaunna, you're healthier. But technically, once I crossed over that 35-year-old threshold, I was officially a geriatric
Oh
mother
yeah.
having
Yeah,
Kendrick.
that
So
bullshit.
so
Yeah.
adding that layer to it of
Yeah.
age, because we talked about ageism a couple times. So given that it is complicated, so I don't want people to rush in and out of this study with big grand sweeping decisions about themselves, but we should take pause
Yeah.
in regard to it, as you mentioned. So yeah, lots of layers to that.
Yeah. All right. So let's shift into phase three here, which is connected, right? So we're
Yeah.
now going to shift to you've had your kiddo and you're a mom and you're traversing all that that means. And so many of you may have heard of this "mommy needs wine" or jokes about mom wanting wine to manage motherhood, and there's been on and off reports around this correlation that is happening between a mom's need to cope and manage the stress of motherhood with this kind of light-hearted, well, give me a bottle of wine and that will help me do that, right? So there's a problem there, a fundamental problem around this association that alcohol is a tool of stress management, right? And we know that that can lead down some problematic pathways, right? So that's not what we want to talk about per se. What we want to talk about is how this correlation or connection or the use of alcohol as a tool of stress management for motherhood papers over the fact that why would a mom even need a glass of wine to manage the stress in the first place, right? Like, what is at the system? What is at the root that is fueling those feelings of overwhelm, stress, despair, loneliness, all those pieces that many, many mothers feel throughout their motherhood career, right? This isn't necessarily just with newborns, this could be at any point in the motherhood career. And so we really just wanted to kind of elevate or raise this idea that let's move beyond funny platitudes around moms and wine and think about what systems are lacking that create the conditions where someone might reach for a glass of wine in the first place, right? And so just to kind of throw things out to get the ball rolling, Shaunna, I'm thinking postnatal care, right? How kind of insufficient that is. Healthcare in general, access to healthcare, childcare costs, school and sport schedules. We've talked about that before on this podcast about how impossible it is to manage that, right? What about parenting and the ways in which that still falls primarily on one parent, often the parent who identifies as the mother, right? And low wage labor, lack of parental leave, lack of medical leave. I mean, all of the things. So, what do you think about this when we talk about kind of normalizing that connection between alcohol and motherhood, and what that does is act as a distraction to all of these larger systemic policy changes that are needed or cultural changes that are needed?
Mhm. Well, last I checked, Lisa, I've been a mom for 13 years now, and let me just say the sippy sips have not completely gotten out of proportion, but they have increased and plateaued, right? And what I think is really interesting around this is I almost feel like mom needs wine, and not querying that statement is a great way to, how can I say, it might almost be a form of victim blaming. Like as a birth parent, I'm a victim of systems that don't speak to each other, work well together, support me, support my child and me. And so I then have to figure it out individually in ways that will never win against a huge system. Will never win. Like you don't win until they like graduate from high school and start to become independent. Like you don't win. You don't get to a place of, oh, whew, okay, now the tide has turned in such a way that I can have a little bit of pressure off my shoulders. Nah. And so it does feel like individuals, disparate individuals trying to correct entire systems that will never be corrected. They just, not in the near future, rather, will not be corrected. And so, given that, I think, what does that support look like for mothers, right? Well, some of it is flat out just we need to query gender roles for those that are in heterosexual relationships, querying gender roles. Why is it that the mother is doing certain things and the father is not, right? Why is it that certain systems don't necessarily see the responsibilities, like the invisible labor of motherhood? Like, do you remember that, Lisa, when we saw something on, I think it was on Instagram, where it was this story that went viral around this mother where the dad slash husband said, what do you do all day while I'm at work? Right? She was a stay-at-home mom. What do you do all day while I'm at work? And she had some small kids under 5. And she said, oh, let me just help him to see what I do all day. I'm not doing anything all day for a week. So you can see what's being done when you don't see what's being done, right? And so with that, the invisible labor of things. One of my really close girlfriends that I pledged with, we talk about this all the time around the cop out of a dad or some other support that should be supportive or more supportive. Just leave me a list. Just tell me what to do and I'll do it. Do you not understand that the emotional labor of even creating the damn list is still too much for certain mothers? And so, given that I think we have so many different systems that don't work together, never speak well together, God forbid you're in a situation like me where the co-parenting is phenomenal, but you still have to deal with the logistics of living in 2 different houses, kids that are 3 years or several years apart, having different interests in different schools. My sons won't even be in the same school ever again until Trey is a senior in high school and Kendrick is in 9th grade. They're in 8th and 5th right now. So, given that all of those systems just don't work, and what is mom left to do? This goes back to our conversations around self-care and mom needs wine. A whole wine warehouse ain't gonna fix this shit right now. Okay. It's just not.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
we need to name that. We just need to name it.
Yeah, and I do think it's so because I see these memes and they're lighthearted, right? Like
Yeah, yeah, that's right.
they're funny and lots of mums can relate around it, around that stress and but it
Hmm.
is just such a it's such a distraction, right?
That's
Like
right.
no one then asks, well, why? Why are we why are moms feeling like they need this and everything you just identified? Um, and that's a long time to be managing all those things, right? You can love your children, you know, out the wazoo or whatever, right? That's
Hmm.
it's not a question of how much you love your kids, right? It's around the fact that there is this disproportionate burden on moms and then they're just supposed to deal with it.
Hmm.
Right.
Oh yeah. Oh
So
yeah.
here,
Just
have a
deal with
glass
it.
of wine, right? Just
Yeah.
relax. Well, there's also this little bit now that I say that just relax makes me think there's also this undertone around, we know that there is a sexist and misogynistic perspective around women being too emotional and quote unquote hysterical, right?
Uh-huh.
And
Uh-huh.
so then there's this, now I'm thinking this like, here, Shauna, just have a glass of wine, relax, sit down, right? Like you're in some way overreacting to the stress and organization and overwhelm of motherhood. I'm just going to give you a glass of wine and that's going to make that all better. But I'm not actually saying that you're overreacting, right? But implicit in placating you with a glass or a bottle of wine is this, you need to relax, Shauna, right? Like you're the problem, to back to your point about victim blaming.
Hmm. Oh
That
yeah.
just
Oh yeah.
that just popped into my head that there's this other piece around it that might
Oh,
be tied
it's
to kind of sexist stereotypes about women's overreaction and emotionality, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, it's an adult pacifier. Get your wine sippy cup and chill out somewhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think going back to the let's take the victim blaming piece of what you just said a step further. I remember I can't remember all the details to it, but I remember when I was still married and there were certain things that I wanted to see happen and they weren't happening for the boys at the time. And the the conversation was around, this is what I want done. Let's say it's 5 things I want done. Your partner, dad or whomever, may say, that's a little bit over the top, Shauna. You don't really need those 5 things done. Maybe you need 2 things done. And so that is in turn victim blaming
Yeah.
again, because
Yeah.
your way is seen as over parenting or
Mm-hmm.
overreacting or over what have you, when the mother or whomever may be like, well, I think you're underreacting. I think that all these 5 things are indeed
Yeah.
necessary. They're required, not recommended. So, there also is that miscommunication, or I don't even want to say miscommunication. I
Right.
want it to be misaligned priorities
Yeah.
about those pieces too, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
you know, well, yes, I want Trey and Kendrick to have a snack after school because they have lunch so early. The system is the problem with the lunch early, but that's
Yeah.
another podcast. But they have lunch very early, so I want them to have something as soon as they get out of school. Oh, well, they can just figure it out when they get to the house. They can just make a make a bowl of cereal and figure it out. No, they both have athletic practices and events in the evening. You're going to want a high standard of performance at athletic events in the evening off of some damn cereal. Well, another parent might be like, Shauna, you're overreacting. Tell them to get them a PB&J and they'll be fine. So, given that, I think those mismatched expectations of one parent in connection to the other also leads to the mom needs wine pacifying.
Mm-hmm.
Pacifier, I guess. Pacifier. Yeah.
Yeah,
But
but it's still all individual choice. It's still couched as individual choices, right? But
mm-hmm,
versus the system that
mm-hmm.
is set up that like actively works against
Hello.
creating easy or less stressful parenting, I guess. Because
That's
parenting is
right.
probably never easy, but that yeah, and that's the piece that gets missed every single time, right? Is
That's right.
that
That's
that
right.
system piece. And JD Vance, who's the
Mm-hmm.
vice presidential candidate on the Republican side, I don't want to, I'm not quoting him because I don't know exactly what he said, but he made some comment related to how would a Trump Vance presidency or administration address childcare, and he said something to the effect of, well, we don't need cheaper childcare or better childcare, right? Because you can just lean on your family. Your family can look after your kids. And one of the responses that I saw to that was something
Right,
like, "Oh, really, JD? You think we haven't thought of that? Well, what a novel idea.
right, right,
Asking
right,
my family to help with childcare." Well, right, so it's not a novel idea, right? And millions of parents probably do that, but also millions of parents don't have that option of asking
hello.
family. And what are we doing there? We are saying, okay, well, it's just your fault for not asking your family members to help with that childcare, not
Victim
our fault
blaming once
as an
again.
administration that we don't have safe, affordable, regulated childcare options
Mm-hmm.
for working families, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I mean, I think you listeners, you need to look that up, because I don't want to be 100%, I'm probably misquoting a little bit, but it was something in that region, right, where
Mm-hmm.
families were like, oh, well, thank you, JD Vance, for that really, that really great insight that I had never thought of myself, right? Yeah. Yeah.
And let's be clear, parents have attempted to think of everything in regards
Exactly.
to all of these issues. Um, and so with that, I'm anyone that spouts out a quote unquote solution
Mm,
that's not nuanced and too quick, that's telling me that you don't understand the depths of the damn problem.
right.
So, when someone who, and again, no offense to anyone who does not have children, but for folks that do ask those sincere questions, like Lisa, you and I had a great conversation at the airport the other day where you did ask a sincere question, which I know was coming from a great place of, well, can they have dinner at this time? Legit ass question. I wish they could have dinner at that time too. Because of these systems in place,
Yep.
I got a kiddo that's got to have early dinner at 2:30, and I've got another kid that's got to have an early dinner at 4 before we walk in the door at 8:30 from a practice, an event, etc. Well, you did not come back with a JD Vance response like, oh, it should be just this simple. Da, 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 da. No, you understood the complexity of this is the challenge, not it's a simple answer. That communicates clearly that he does not understand the
Right.
challenges of the systems. Why? Because he's never had to personally grapple with those systems in ways that other people around him may have,
Well, and he is a
including his
parent.
own spouse,
Yeah, and
including his spouse. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. That's what blows my mind is he's a parent, which, yeah, just tells me exactly that. So who's the person who's actually parenting in that relationship, right? Um, yeah, yeah, you're right. Like, there's just stuff I don't know or understand, but is the more you explain to me around those systems, around
Yeah.
healthcare and around schooling schedules and around access to childcare, I mean, the more it just blows my mind. And then, when I start to
Yeah.
think about, well, me giving you a bottle of wine to deal with all those like policy failures,
Uh-huh.
that's not gonna do squat, right?
Hold up. Wait a minute, y'all. But for the record, Dr. Lisa has sent me some lovely goodies from Colorado for holiday and other things that I deeply appreciate. So y'all do not allow her to opt out of sending those. She feels the need to. But I'm saying we have an understanding that that lovely, wonderful, gracious gift does not solve the systems.
Right,
It doesn't even chip at the systems.
right.
And so I appreciate you even wanting to better understand the systems around, like, I hate to say this, but it's true. All of it is, it depends, and it's a relative question. So, like, to your point around affordable, safe childcare, even that is nuanced because affordable is relative,
It
right?
is.
So,
Yeah.
in my county, we have before care and after care for some kids. What's affordable for me may not be affordable for another parent.
Right.
So what does that look like? And so anyway, I want us to be careful as we continue to try to make individual people bear the burden of
Hmm.
huge systems that are bound to crush them. It's
Yeah.
let's be more complex in our thinking here. It's not just, oh, well, why don't you just be responsible for pick? And Lisa, let me be very clear. The challenges that you and I talked about in the airport the other day, This is in one of the best case situations where,
Mm,
thank God, money is still flowing through the house. I do have options of family and safe people that can pick up my kids. I do have some of those pieces of the puzzle, and it's still not working to the best of its ability because a person, either parent, a family, extended family, still is not a big enough solution to these larger
right,
issues.
right.
I work from home every day. I don't even have to work through the logistics of getting to an office every day like we talked about before. And they still are problems. So when you have some of the best case scenario where I have the most flexibility over my own time and it's still a mountain to climb, I can only imagine for people that do have to go into work, that don't have enough
Yeah.
money that's regular, that doesn't have family around or people that they trust around with their kids, that can't afford after school sports. Because guess what, y'all? All sports cost, including at public schools. There is some form of financial investment. It's no longer free like back in the day, 30 some years ago when I was a kiddo. So all of these pieces are insurmountable pieces that we just cannot throw wine at. I mean, you can keep throwing the wine if you want to, but it's not going to fix it.
It isn't going to fix it. That's a great way to end this segment, I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah.
Don't be throwing wine at these systemic policy problems and pay attention. We're 8 weeks out or 7 weeks out when this podcast
That's
airs, I
it.
think. And the
Yeah.
childcare support for working families, these are all policies that you're going to be hearing at least one candidate talk about more than another, I would
Mm-hmm.
imagine. But you need to be
Mm-hmm.
educated on this because, yeah, wine, not going to
Yeah.
cut it.
Yeah.
Not going to cut it.
Yeah. And whether you're a parent or not, for those folks that are not a parent, I once was without children. Um, do not disregard these topics as if they don't matter because you don't have kids. Because guess what? I'm pretty sure that there are young people that you care about in your life that got here. They're here now. We care about their well-being. We care about the future of everything. And so paying attention to these issues are a big concern. So, but all right, Dr. Lisa, it feels like we're always in election season because
We
almost
are.
every one of our topics is directly related to someone who can or will be in office.
Yeah, yeah.
So I appreciate you having this conversation with me, of course. But for our listeners, let me just tell you where to find us. Of course, you can find us at YouTube, Unfazed, Unedited. You can also go to Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Instagram, we are there. LinkedIn, we are also there. We usually post the articles that come along with our topics of the week, our phases. You can email us with questions, comments, concerns at info@unfazedpodcast.com. And of course, our website, unfazedpodcast.com, where you can find all of the archive shows as well as the new shows. So if you liked this episode, please like us, subscribe to us, leave a review, share with your folks, your coworkers, or anyone else in this phase of your life. So, Dr. Lisa, until next time.
Until next time.